Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar. My name is Sienna Gonzalez and today I'm just going to be doing some reflecting on the interdepartmental instruction I had the privilege of completing as part of the CTC program. Before I recount any concrete concepts or any memories from the CTC, I did want to provide a bit of background about myself as I feel that my own academic experience greatly informs the approach I take towards instructing. I received my undergraduate degree here at the Colorado School of Mines in the chemistry department. However, I switched to the materials science department to work towards my PhD as I felt that it was better aligned with my interests. I find that students from these two departments have very different approaches to thinking about different systems. Chemistry students love to think about the molecules and the systems on a really small scale, whereas materials students love thinking about larger bulk systems and the overall properties that can result. Because I have experience as a student myself taking both of these approaches, I have been able to teach a variety of courses across these two departments. In particular, I have helped out with inorganic chemistry as well as nanoscience in the chem department, and I've also helped with an undergraduate kinetics course in the materials department. Because these students have different backgrounds and different interests, it's very important to consider their experience as an instructor when you're designing these courses and disseminating information. During my time in the chemistry department in particular, I was made aware of a misconception that many instructors hold towards their students. It became so popular that the American Chemical Society themselves actually published an article on it. And that is the assumption that students quite often forget everything they've learned upon the conclusion of a chemistry course. This misconception likely stems from the process of cramming prior to an exam. Students will be responsible for many slides, many lectures that are going to be tested, and they'll memorize everything the night before the exam. They'll take the exam, they might do well, they might not, but within 48 hours, poof, all that knowledge that they stored in their brain is gone. As a student who underwent the cramming process, I can say that there is a little bit of truth to this misconception. There were a couple times where I had several amino acids or several reactions that I had to memorize before an exam. I would take the exam and I did pretty well, but when the concept would come back up, whether it was in research or whether it was in a subsequent course, I found myself always having to refer back to my notes. I never quite retained anything in my brain alone from those high volume courses. However, I dislike the way this misconception is worded because it seems to place blame onto the students for undergoing a means of studying or a means of attempting to learn that is necessary in order to pass the course that they are ultimately paying money to be in. Students don't cram because they dislike the course or because they want to spite their instructor for not teaching them well. Students cram because they simply want to pass and they want to complete their degree. So, I love that the American Chemical Society paper presents an alternative means of addressing this cramming problem. Rather than blaming students for simply learning as much material as they can and reciting it on the exam, it's important to consider the approach that the instructor is taking towards presenting this information in a way that is palatable and in a way that is memorable. Indeed, instructors have the ability to help their students retain this information long term, and they can achieve this through deliberately designing their courses and employing some teaching techniques that make it possible for students to engage with the material and as a result, recall it long term. When designing courses with increased student retention of material in mind, it's very important to consider each student as a whole individual rather than just another name on a class list. In any given classroom, there's going to be students from a variety of diverse socioeconomic, educational, and overall cultural backgrounds. And it's very important as instructors to celebrate these differences through inclusive pedagogy rather than creating additional hurdles for students to cross over. Basically, diversity in cultures, learning styles, overall background knowledge can be celebrated in a classroom, and students can learn a lot from one another. It's very important to design courses in ways that allow students with different strengths to shine. In my experience as an instructor, one of the things that worked for me to help make my classroom more inclusive was implementing alternative assessment methods. Not every student does well with a standard pen and paper timed exam. For example, there might be neurodivergent students who have trouble focusing with this type of environment. These students know the material very, very well, just as well as any other student, but perhaps they can't show what they know on this type of assessment. By allowing students to complete projects or presentations, for example, they can show what they know and communicate with the other students in a way that they wouldn't be able to on an exam. This helps them succeed and develop real-world techniques for presentations and for group work that they wouldn't get to show on an exam as well. Another technique that worked for me was sharing my own story. As a neurodivergent Hispanic female, I find that sharing my own struggles with my students and being open and honest allows them to be open and honest with me in return. This makes everybody more comfortable in the classroom environment and really helps students to be themselves. Another way instructors can help improve student retention of material is through the implementation of teaching techniques during their lectures. Basically, students don't tend to learn very well when instructors merely talk at them and spew lots of information at once. Instead, through a concept called engaged pedagogy, it's been found that students tend to learn best when there is an interactive relationship taking place with their instructor. In other words, the instructor helps students to make sense of and engage with the new information that is being presented, rather than merely spewing bullet points on a slide to them and expecting them to write everything down. In my own micro-teaching experience, something that worked for me to help make my lecture more engaging was implementing exit tickets at the conclusion of the lecture. Sometimes students don't go back and review the material and determine whether they truly understand until it's time to cram for an exam, and this is what leads to that short-term retention. At the end of each class, however, if students can reflect on what they've learned and identify misconceptions early on, these can be rectified before the exam, and it will help students remember them for a longer period of time. Additionally, clicker questions throughout the lecture can help students stay focused and engaged. It can feel very monotonous when there are slides after slides of just bullet points. Clicker questions can help break up these bullet points and can also help students identify their misconceptions from slide to slide. This works even better than exit tickets. They don't have to wait until the end of the lecture. In my own micro-teaching, I implemented a clicker question after defining a very complex concept called high entropy. Basically, this concept had several bullet points underneath it, and there were several different aspects of this definition that all contributed to the overall term being used in literature. As I implemented my clicker question, I found that some students didn't get it right on the first try. And rather than powering through the rest of the lecture to try to get to all of the slides that I had planned, I then implemented a prioritization of learning over lesson plan. Basically, I took some extra time to go back to that slide that had prompted the clicker questions and explain to students what each of these bullet points meant and why the correct clicker question was correct. Although this meant I didn't get through the rest of my lecture, students then left the class with a better understanding of that key concept. And ultimately, that matters to me more than getting through my lesson plan for the day. Just to reiterate some of the key takeaways from this mini webinar, students from different backgrounds tend to have different strengths. And it's very important as an instructor to allow students to use these strengths to inform their decisions when problem solving and when learning new material. Additionally, courses can prioritize collaboration and application rather than just merely hoping that students can memorize everything and regurgitate it on the exam. When students actually engage with the material in a meaningful and deliberate way, they tend to remember that material for years to come. Finally, instructors themselves should increase interaction with students whenever possible. This allows students to check their understanding of the material as they are learning it, rather than waiting before an exam to gauge whether there is any misunderstanding. Through implementing all of these techniques, you can find that instructors and students develop meaningful relationships, and this leads to longer-term retention on the student's part. Thank you all for listening, and with that, I will take any questions.